Good morning.
Hello. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Hope you're doing well.
Yeah.
So nice to have you here. You're actually privileged.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So the last lecture got finished?
Yes, sir. It got over some half an hour before.
Oh,
I was not here. I was actually in the class.
Who was the speaker? Previous speaker?
Sir, I'll just tell you.
Yeah.
Rajat Rastogi, sir. Rajat Rastogi, sir.
Yeah. That's a Vivek supervisor.
Yes. I'm getting confused between the speakers now. I'm calling them also, na? So thoda naam confuse karo.
I know.
He's from Roorkee. You may be knowing him.
Oh, yeah, of course. As I said, of course, he was also PhD supervisor of Vivek. Yes.
Sir, should I go ahead with the introduction? I would. We can.
Yeah. Is Dr. Vivek around?
Yeah. Vivek sir. Sir, Vivek sir has gone to class. He's in the class now.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
And mainly who are the participants?
So participants are from industry as well as from the faculties of other colleges.
Okay, and are there students also?
No students.
Okay, it's a complete. Okay.
But there are research scholars are there here.
Okay.
PhD students.
Okay. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah,
I'm ready.
I welcome you all after a break, and I'm privileged to have Professor Ashish Verma from IISc with us today for the next talk. So let me give a brief introduction about Dr. Ashish Verma. Dr. Ashish Verma is the convener of IISc Sustainable Transportation Lab, famously known as IST Lab. He's a PhD from IIT Bombay and is currently serving as a professor of Transportation Systems Engineering at Department of Civil Engineering, Indian Institute of Science, IISc Bangalore. He was a visiting professor at ITMO University, St. Petersburg, Russia during 2016, and a visiting fellow at Queensland University of Technology, QUT, Brisbane, Australia, during the year 2019. So before joining IISc, he has served in IIT Guwahati and Mumbai Metropolitan Region Development Authority, MMRDA. His research interests are in sustainable transportation planning and policy, integrated public transport planning and management, transportation and quality of life, QOL, transportation and climate change, modeling and optimization of transportation systems, travel behavior analysis and modeling, pedestrian and crowd flow modeling, driver behavior and road safety, intelligent transport systems, ITS, traffic control and management, and many more. He has authored more than 212 research publications, including more than 85 publications in the area of sustainable transportation. He has also authored a book on public transportation planning and management in developing countries, along with Professor T.V. Ramaiah, who is a retired professor from IIM Bangalore. This was published by CRC Press, and also another book on integrated public transportation system planning and modeling was published by VDM Publishing House Limited. He has also been co-editor of the conference proceedings of WCTR 2016, 5th CTRG, RATE 2018, and 6th CTRG, which is currently under progress. He has published many leading articles in Elsevier, Springer, and is the former editor of Journal of Transport Policy. He is the associate editor of Urban Rail Transit, Springer, and the Journal of Modern Mobility Systems, JMMS, Mason Publishing, etc. He is a founding and immediate past president of the Society of Transportation Research Group of India. This is famously known as TRG, and is presently serving as steering and scientific committee member of World Conference on Transport Research Society, that is WCTRS, based in the University of Leeds, UK. So he is also the chair of the technical committee of TRG on travel behavior and transportation demand. He is the chair of special interest group SIGH2 behavior and transport, SIGH2 of WCTRS, which is focused on transportation in developing economies. So I welcome Dr. Ashish Verma as a speaker for our FDP, Advances in Highway Technology and Transportation Systems. Over to Dr. Ashish Verma. Thank you, sir, for being with us.
Thanks, Professor Niranjan, and of course, Professor Vivek, for inviting me. And yes, you're head of the department, for organizing this wonderful FDP and giving me opportunity to share some of our work on the topic of crowd dynamics. So I think I have time till 12:45.
Yes, sir. 12:45.
Yeah.
12:45.
Okay.
After that, we'll have a small question answer session, discussion.
I'll share my screen now.
Sure, sir. Sure.
Let's see where it's let me know if you can see the title slide.
I'm able to see the half screen here. Visible? Huh?
Is it visible?
Yes, visible.
Visible, sir. Okay, okay, good. So while the broad area is crowd dynamics, what I would be sharing today is, our experience and the results from this major empirical, data collection and study, Kumbh Mela experiment, measuring and understanding the dynamics of mankind's largest crowd. This was an Indo-Dutch collaboration. In short, we call it as KME or Kumbh Mela experiment. And, my main collaborator, principal investigator on the Dutch side, was from University of Amsterdam, from computational science. I was the principal investigator from India. There were other institutions that were also involved in this, which I'll show in the next slide. So, just to give a glimpse and also duly acknowledge the contributions of several institutions that were involved in this work. As I said, this was quite a substantial effort and a unique experiment we did on crowd dynamics. So, IISc Bangalore, of course, and within IISc Bangalore, the Civil Engineering Department, the Robert Bosch Center for Cyber Physical Systems, and Department of Computational and Data Science. Likewise, experts from IIT Kanpur, even Ramaiah Institute of Management, Bangalore, have been involved, specifically Professor Verma. Among the Dutch institutions, University of Amsterdam was the main partner, but along with that, colleagues from TU Delft and TU Twente were also involved, and there were other colleagues from ETH Zurich and TU Singapore and ITU University in Russia, in St. Petersburg, who were also involved. Particularly ITU University, colleagues were from High Performance Computing Institute, and they did some 3D simulation modeling of pedestrian movement in certain built-up areas. We also had industry partners, Tech Mahindra and some of the startups like Tara Tech and Aravan, systems who brought their expertise of big data, IoT, specialized devices for sensing, etc. And likewise, some of the Dutch industry partners, for example, Salend Electronics, were provided us with the customized IoT chips that we used for capturing data of crowd dynamics. So, due acknowledge to all the partners and also to the two funding agencies, which was Ministry of Electronics and IT, Government of India, and the Netherlands Organization for Scientific Research, NWA. as I said, it was a stupendous effort, exceptional effort, I would say. And just to highlight, the whole empirical data collection and study was focused on the Kumbh Mela in 2016 in Ujjain, Madhya Pradesh, where we had set up our own collaborative Indo-Dutch research camp in the Mela area, with this kind of a temporary research camp being set up. You can see in the photo within a lot of spiritual camps across us, as typically done in Kumbh Mela. So this was a unique experience where almost 140 to 150 people were working from this camp, including about 20-25 of my lab members, including myself, for full 1.5 months during April and May in 2016. During the whole hot summer period, with all temporary facilities being created, including device room and workstations, etc., in such a research camp. And these are the glimpses of how the life was, the daily briefing and debriefings that used to happen. We had recruited almost 120 internship students from various institutions, not just in that region, in Madhya Pradesh, but also from several IITs, planning schools, IIMs, etc. And these kind of workstations and work cabins was created. It was a life far from a comfortable working environment in our desk and in our labs. And so it was definitely a very unique experiment. And this also saw, since this was an Indo-Dutch collaboration, it also saw quite good attention from top officials across both the sides. This is photos of the visit of the Dutch ambassador to India and senior officials from Ministry of Electronics and IT during our whole empirical study and data collection phase at Ujjain Kumbh Mela. And they were really quite excited what kind of work we were doing. Again, how meetings and briefings and debriefings, sessions, these are glimpses of those. Overall, we trained about 160 manpower, including 3 MTech students, 3 PhD students, about 34 research staffs, and 120 interns. So, as I can say, this was quite a substantial effort, and a lot of people have got trained in working on aspects of crowd dynamics using big data and IoT. So, further outline of my presentation, I would first give an introduction to set the context correctly. When we think about Kumbh Mela, what activities happen, how does it shapes up the crowd dynamics, and what complexities are associated with such kind of mass gatherings and the crowd movement in such mass gatherings, so that we have right context setting for this whole study. I'll then go through aspects of data collection, etc. And then several sections of the overall crowd dynamic study, including crowd sensing, studies on crowd sensing, macroscopic studies, microscopic studies, activity, travel, behavior and facility planning, event planning and religious tourism, and eventually taking the synthesis from all these studies, we also came out with crowd management guidelines for disaster management agencies and authorities who deal or control the crowd movement and crowd management in mass gatherings. For them, such crowd management guidelines could be useful. So I'll also briefly talk about. I won't be able to cover everything, but within the given time, but would do my best to at least cover some of the studies going further. So in terms of the number of people attending, now, okay, I've already shown the figures here. The number of people attending event like Kumbh Mela has been increasing, ever increasing, with every versions of the Kumbh Mela experiment. It could typically vary anywhere between 75 million, which we saw estimated number, which actually participated in Kumbh Mela during the whole period of 1 month, to even sorry, this is not Ujjain. This is the Earth Kumbh Mela in Allahabad, where they saw about 120 million people estimated coming. So if you actually think about this number, it's actually much more than multiple times the population of several European countries. Even if you take a single day maximum count, on any given day, how many maximum footfalls were observed, it can vary anywhere between 1 crore to 1.5 crore people coming to the Kumbh Mela in a day. It's actually, these numbers are even multiple times more than the population of the cities where the Kumbh Mela happens. And as you may know, Kumbh Mela actually rotates among 4 different locations, which is Ujjain, Haridwar, Allahabad, and Nashik. Okay. Number of people attending has been increasing. There could be several reasons. Of course, population over time keeps increasing. At the same time, maybe there are more people committing sins. And so, the whole purpose of coming to Kumbh Mela is to clean your sins. So they want to come. More and more people wants to come and clean their sins. That's on the lighter side. But of course, the challenge is with this growing number going beyond the capability of human understanding to, imagine or control the crowd in an effective way. And that's where the use of technology, more scientific methods, more scientific understanding of crowd dynamics can be very useful in coming out with tools, coming out with guidelines, coming out with more scientific ways of crowd control and crowd safety, since the numbers are beyond anybody's, human ability to understand and comprehend. In the modern times, with the availability of various kinds of sensors, people carrying smartphones, wearable devices, availability of CCTV cameras, etc. These events have kind of become big data events in the sense that you can actually get a lot of data. And this opportunity of having this big data also poses new possibilities of how crowd control and crowd management can be done. Unfortunate part with these events, and it's not just Kumbh Mela, several other mass religious gatherings that we see not just in India but elsewhere, for example, Hajj in Makkah, or places like Israel, where several such mass religious gatherings happen, and from time to time these events have seen unfortunate instances of crowd stampedes and crowd death, people dying or getting injured. These are some of the examples of past Kumbh Melas where these kind of stampedes have happened in recent times. Also, even if you look at outside, if you look at the recent instances in India, I think on the New Year Eve in Vaishno Devi, there was a stampede this year due to some kind of trigger caused by the control measures of the police. I think in last couple of years we have seen some stampedes in mass religious gatherings happening in Israel also, and it keeps happening in Hajj also from time to time. The issue is due to a empirical evidence, based scientific understanding of crowd dynamics. The event managers still don't have scientific ways or evidence-based, data to back their actions and their control measures. And this is where this project actually tries contributing. How when pedestrians gather in large numbers or move on streets in large numbers, which actually turns into a crowd, how a better understanding of crowd can help us improve safety and avoid situations of stampede. Coming to the context of Kumbh Mela and the case study of Ujjain. Now, if some of you are aware, by the way, I mean, this for my knowledge, is there anybody among the participants who have any experience with Kumbh Mela? Anybody who would like to just speak out? If you
Yeah, I request the participants to please interact with sir, as we have heard many of his talks. He wants interaction.
yes, yes, yes.
He
So,
wants interaction.
anybody by chance have got experience, first-hand experience of Kumbh Mela, or maybe a similar event like Kumbh Mela, mass gathering?
Participants can feel free to interact with sir.
Not of Kumbh Mela, but like the general melas that we go for,
Like,
and in Delhi, actually, marketplaces are also like so crowded.
yeah,
So
yeah, of course, of
that
course.
that way also, like earlier Chandni Chowk and Sarojini Nagar and
Yeah.
Janpad, all these places used to be like, but especially Chandni Chowk area and Jama Masjid area during Eid
Yes.
time.
So application of such approaches, of course, goes beyond mass religious gatherings. Any kind of large gathering, organized or unorganized, can have application of such, insights, scientific insights that we derive. It could be New Year Eve. People in many cities go to specific places. They crowd specific places for celebrations. For example, in Bangalore, people tend to gather around MG Road and nearby streets, and it becomes a major challenge for crowd management. Likewise, in Mumbai, a lot of people go towards India, the Gateway of India, on the New Year Eve, and it becomes a challenge for crowd management. Likewise, political gatherings, where large people come to listen to a politician for political speeches, or even sports events where large people come and gather, like IPL matches, cricket matches, or football matches, and so on. These are all possible applications where one can think about understanding and deploying more scientific, crowd control measures. And in terms of religious gatherings, as I said, Kumbh Mela has been the focus of this study. Also because Kumbh Mela actually gives us an opportunity in one single event over, say, a time of 1 month or 2 months, all kinds of representative situations that you would generally see in one or the other mass gatherings. Okay. What happens typically in any mass religious gatherings in India? Say sometimes people go to river bank for taking holiday, whether you say Krishna Pushkaram, I think that kind of a festival in Andhra and Telangana, or during Chhat Puja, people go to in Bihar, and that region people go to river bank and do some rituals. There are several such mass religious gatherings where people go to river bank and take a holiday. Likewise, on many occasions, people simply queue up to specific temples for darshan, and you have a specific kind of crowd control challenge that is thrown open to the local authorities and the police to control and manage the crowd well. Often in many mass religious gatherings, you have processions, large religious processions that happen. For example, the Rath Yatra in Puri, in Odisha, and likewise in many other places. Interestingly, in Kumbh Mela, you would get to have all such representative situations in one event. You have mass gatherings, you have people visiting temples in large numbers on different days of Kumbh Mela. You have people going to river bank. You have people, participating in large processions or witnessing them. All kinds of such representative situations happen. So if we talk about the specific case of Ujjain, there is this holy river Shipra, which is considered to be important river in which people go and take holiday. generally during the whole period of Kumbh Mela, but also particularly on special days, which are called as Shahi Snan days or holy days. And there are specific points. For example, Ram Ghat in Ujjain, which is considered to be a point or a location where everybody would like to reach and do the holy dip there on those special days when the holy dip needs to be done. They will also have a time period constraint within which they need to perform this activity. Then there are other important temples where people would like to go. For example, in Ujjain, there is this Jyotirling called Mahakaleshwar temple, where people would also like to go and have darshan. Now, the situation of taking holy dip at, say, Ram Ghat on Shipra River is in a spiritual motivation sense very similar to some activity in, say, Hajj in Makkah, where, say, one of the ceremony is to throw stone on a wall, as part of a important ritual, only on specific days during the Hajj and specific time period on those specific days. Okay, so everybody then tries to move towards that location where they perform this ritual of throwing stone on a wall and complete it within a limited time, from the point of view of spiritual gains and cleaning your sins, etc. Similar is the situation or a spiritual motivation when you have the Shahi Snan days or holy dip days, where during a limited time period, everybody is trying to reach a specific point or a location on the river bank for a specific ritual of holy dip to clean their sins. Okay, so likewise, actually, one can find a lot of generality or common, context among different kinds of religious gatherings, not just within one specific religion, but among all religions. I'm focusing, or I'm limiting my, explanation and discussion to religious gatherings, mass religious gatherings, because that's what has been our empirical observation. But in many ways, you can apply and think about these crowd dynamic problems to other kinds of gatherings also.
Yeah, I hope Priyanka ji's query has been attended to. Any other participant who wants to interact with sir, can please.
Yeah, so, please feel free to interrupt me even if you have any point or question at any point. See, when these sessions are face to face, I really enjoy much more. And Niranjan also knows.
Yes, I've been in association with sir since almost 10, 12, 13 years. And he's a person who interacts every time he talks.
Yeah, so it gets limited on these online sessions, but still, whatever best we can make use of it. Anyway, so please feel free to interrupt me wherever you feel like asking any questions or giving.
Participants can put up a message here. You can see on the chat box if they wish to speak with you.
Yeah. So other important, complex aspect of mass religious gatherings in India, and especially events like Kumbh Mela, is the heterogeneity of crowd, heterogeneity of people, which brings its own complexity of behavioral and psychological nature of the crowd that one can then anticipate. So you have mixing of, holy men or sadhus on one side. Among sadhus also, you have different, groups who have different style of worshipping, different way of life, different preaching, methods. That also has a bearing on their psychological behavior, their psychological traits as compared to other, sadhus and holy men. That's one set of people whom you will typically see in these kind of mass gatherings. Plus, a large set of visitors to these mass gatherings come from rural population, rural area. Now, many of them would come in groups, large groups, they could be families together or set of families together coming from village with mix of men, women, and children. Often it is seen that these groups tend to form a very flexible amoeba-like shape in the sense that men would probably make the boundary or guard the group. Women and children will be in the center, and the shape of this group would actually be flexible. And these groups could be anywhere between 4 or 5 people to even 10, 15 people moving together. Often they will hold hands or shoulders, to remain intact within the group. The other key factor with rural population is the literacy level, the availability of devices, say smartphones, or even basic phone. Many of them would not have basic phone also. Say in a group, only few people may have a phone, that too not necessarily a smartphone. So if the crowd control authorities want to disseminate information through, say, app on mobile, they would have challenge in disseminating into all people coming, all visitors coming to Kumbh Mela, because some of them may not have access. Likewise, many of the people coming from rural area may be illiterate. They may not be even able to read signs and information written on display boards and so on. So that is another set of people, and then you have third set of people coming from suburban or urban areas, and even a lot of foreigners who come for the sake of experiencing the adventure of such events. Many of the foreigners are also often followers of some of the other spiritual gurus and would be part of their whole activities in the camps being set up by these spiritual gurus. Now, if you compare this set of people, sadhus and rural population versus people from urban and foreign population, one difference of motivation that one can identify is, while these set of people would be largely spiritually motivated, a lot of people from this set may not be that spiritually motivated, or actually maybe coming with a tourist motivation. Now, having different motivation of coming to this event definitely has bearing on their psychology, as well as response to different kinds of situations and trigger, which we'll try understanding more. In terms of activities, as I said, the most important activity that people would like to do is go to the river bank and take the holy dip. But along with that, they would also like to visit important temples. Now, of course, at least in Hindu religion, we know there are so many gods, and people have their own following and preferences. Somebody is a follower of Lord Shiva, somebody is a follower of Lord Ganesha. They would decide their own priorities of which temple they would like to visit. At the same time, yes, some temples are very important, like this Mahakaleshwar temple, if you talk about Ujjain. So they'd like to visit that. At the same time, as I mentioned, a lot of these spiritual camps are set up by spiritual gurus, where a lot of activities happen, serving of free food. In fact, that's the way, everybody eats in such large events. Otherwise, where you will get food to, feed all people. A lot of these camps serve free food service. Along with that, they will have a lot of spiritual activities like bhajans, or sessions where speeches are given and so on. And people would like to also go to some of these, akhadas or camps and experience those things. At the same time, on several days and several occasions within the event, a lot of processions are taken out, and people may join these processions based on if they are part of one or the other akhada, the spiritual group, or they just want to, stand on the side and experience the excitement of these processions. So this is how these activities are done. But often, many people, many pedestrians who are coming won't have complete information of the area. Many might be illiterate to read and understand signs and warnings. Many people will just follow the crowd. They will not know exactly where to go, or say if somebody is coming more with that tourist, motivation, they'll just like to see, oh, a lot of people are this side, let's go and see what's happening. Most people won't stay in the Kumbh Mela area for a long time. They'll stay for a day or two and then go back, except for those who are, say, part of the spiritual camps and stay for the whole month or so. a majority of people, come for a day or so, complete their activities within limited time and go. So you can categorize the pedestrians either as goal-directed, goal-seeking, or goal-identifying. Goal-directed when they know exactly what activity they want to do, where it is, and so they're heading towards that goal. Or in case of goal-seeking, they're still trying to identify or understand or find out the locations where they can go. Goal identifying is where they're still trying to figure out what to do, and say in many cases just follow the crowd. So all these factors, the heterogeneity of crowd, the activities that they happen. Now these activities are also happening in the presence of incomplete information. Okay. Many of the activities may not be, centrally displayed for people to know, like for example, activities happening in camps, or when and what time there is too much of crowd in a particular temple versus the other, or when one can visit the ghat, or what is the level of crowding there, or people are allowing that or not. These control measures also keep dynamically changing based on the evolving situation by the police. They may, open up certain stretches for people to move forward, or may block it sometime. Vehicular movement restrictions are quite substantial, and people may have less idea about to what extent they will be able to take their vehicles forward, how much traffic jams, they'll be stuck, and so on. So a lot of these uncertainties within which people try to carry out their intended activities and complete all their targets. These are also special events, and so on, especially say holiday days, they are like lifetime opportunity for people to participate, and that has a specific kind of trigger and bearing on their psychological responses to situations, and their motivation levels, and how it shapes the crowd dynamics. These are some glimpses, as I said, I didn't hear anybody saying that they have attended the Kumbh Mela. So just to show you in pictures how a city becomes on, say, specific peak days of Kumbh Mela. And these are glimpses from the peak day of Kumbh Mela 2016 Ujjain, how the river bank was, how the situation was on railway stations. Yeah. And this is a famous square. If in case somebody has gone to Ujjain, there's a famous square called Tower Chowk in Ujjain. And you can see, you just see the heads of people, nothing else. So this kind of visuals, even people living in the city have never seen in their life, how it actually goes. The whole city becomes like this. And this was, the last day of Kumbh Mela 2016, 21st May 2016, where about estimated footfall was about 12 million. 12 million people coming to the city, where the population, which is about 1.2 crores, where the population of the city that time in 2016 was hardly 7 to 8 lakh. Okay, so one can imagine. So the objective of this whole project was to develop methods, models, and algorithms to aid planners and event managers in managing extremely large crowds, to suggest core components of an entire crowd management solution, all the way from the use of devices for sensing and tracking crowd movement, to also developing advanced computational models to help predict how the crowd may evolve, and eventually to create guidelines for crowd management and mass use methods. So talking about the data, the whole idea was that today when we have opportunity of various kinds of devices, okay, whether you take video camera installed, CCTV cameras installed, or your own customized GoPro camera or other kinds of cameras, plus say, images or data coming from drones, or people carrying cell phones, or people wearing certain kinds of wearable, devices, tracking devices, say, wearable GPS trackers or bracelets, etc. If we have opportunity to get all these data into large data processing, big data processing, and with this data processing, building computational and mathematical and simulation models, feeding them into large-scale simulation models, it can then create a good amount of meaningful information for decision makers who are dealing with crowd control. Okay, that's the whole idea, just of this whole project and the work. So this is a video, footage. You can see the date also. It's 25th May, 2016. This was the peak day, and you see this street is actually probably 3 lane on each side, with no vehicles, completely filled with people. This is how it becomes. Now, the important point I'm trying to drive here is that the real empirical situation compared to a say experimental setup of crowd, experiments is very different. Here you will see that there's some boundary, control being put in terms of these barricades, but they're all breached. Somewhere the width is, small, somewhere the width is large. The people breaching into these, boundaries. You can see here people climbing up and down. All these kinds of situation makes the crowd movement more complex to scientifically understand and manage. Okay. This is another picture from the Ghat location, the Ram Ghat location on that peak day of 21st May. Now, if you closely observe, even at microscopic level, there's a lot of group behavior. There are chains of, people trying to sneak in. There is a self-organizing behavior. There is some kind of creeping behavior. There's gap forcing or gap acceptance behavior. These are all, microscopic aspects also that one needs to understand if you really want to deep dive into the crowd dynamics of such, large crowds. So when we did this whole study, we actually divided the whole study into several aspects, whether it is image and video processing or macroscopic studies, microscopic studies, activity, travel, behavior studies, and event planning. And you can see what all kinds of studies we have done in each of these categories. So if you take image and video processing, we have looked at pedestrian detection, trajectory, formation and their tracking, crowd counting, the fundamental relationship, speed, flow, density between crowds, etc. How do you form them using this, abstracted processed data, even detecting groups from these, images and video footages. Some of these things, and this work is still ongoing. This is part of one of my PhD students' work. This will complete image and video processing. Then there's another PhD student. She is actually completing a PhD and giving her oral exam coming Friday on macroscopic studies, where we have studied fundamental diagrams, single file movement of these pedestrians, say while they're queuing up to have darshan in Mahakal temple or other places, stop and go movement, how the bottleneck, has an impact on crowd dynamics, group behavior, and a very unique, group behavior observed in Kumbh Mela called serpentine group behavior. Likewise, in microscopic studies, we have looked at gap acceptance phenomena. Cul-de-sac means understanding crowd dynamics at Ghat region. Cul-de-sac actually means the road to nowhere. It means you reach a dead end. So when you go to Ghat, it's also like, reaching the dead end. So understanding the microscopic crowd dynamics at the Ghat region. And again, at the microscopic level, the impact of group behavior, walking dynamics, following behavior, how people maintain personal space or guard their personal space, and things like that. Likewise, in activity travel behavior, we have tried understanding activity participation, how people decide activities to perform, how do they sequence their activities based on their priorities, and how their travel within performance of these activities is done using what kind of modes, etc. We have also looked at what are the acceptable trip distances we're walking, because as I said, vehicular movements are quite restricted and people walk a lot, and many times they walk much more. It is also because of spiritual motivation as compared to a normal walking on, say, a marketplace or while going to workplace and so on. So there's a acceptable trip distance up to which only people would like to walk, not beyond that. And it may actually vary considerably in such mass religious gatherings as compared to a normal commuting situation. So we've tried understanding that also, and with that understanding, we have tried, coming up with methods and geospatial analysis techniques of um, event planning and planning of various facilities and their locations within the geographical space of the Kumbh Mela event area. Okay, and how will be the accessibility levels based on this acceptability of distance to various of these facilities. And also understanding group activity and how people perform and decide their activities in group. Likewise, we have also tried understanding aspects of event planning, religious tourism aspect, tourist experience to these mass religious gatherings, how that can be utilized for event loyalty, people's revisit intention to these kind of events, how people value and assess service quality aspects, how their satisfaction is versus the service quality provided for different services. So this was another set of events, and all this eventually has helped us create guidelines with respect to crowd control and safety, facility planning, event planning, etc. Now, based on the time, I'll try to run through and show you some of the results and what these studies we have done. Talking about crowd sensing, generally in these kind of events, the police department and the local authorities would install a lot of CCTV cameras. Okay. Sorry. And these CCTV camera footages would come to some kind of control center where on a large dashboard with a lot of screens being placed, the police people or their personnel will be able to see these footages live in the sense of raw data directly coming on these screens, and looking at and comprehending and understanding from that, they will take some decisions and actions as crowd managers. Okay, this is the traditional way. Even today, the way it is happening, there's still a lot less or minimum AI and machine learning or automatic processing of the data and the interpretation and analysis which is involved. So what we are trying to do is, after having details about the location of people through say devices, etc., or having spatial information, and also having data from CCTV, etc. The whole idea is to process them using machine learning methods, using other computational tools, big data analysis, and so on, and arrive at information, processed information, intelligent information, which can then be fed to crowd managers for better crowd control and crowd safety. Now, the challenges with Kumbh Mela data, there are several. This is one snapshot of data taken on May 8th, where some amount of rainfall had also happened on that day in a place called Bombay Dharamshala in Ujjain. And these boxes highlight, some of the challenges. For example, here you will say you have kind of some reflection due to the water on the road, or there is a gap being wrongly identified. There is some, lot of women from rural areas. When they come, they wear actually a gungat or wheel, some kind of wheel. Some people might have a head load, on their head. So what makes it challenging is a lot of noise in the data, a lot of heterogeneity. You don't have a common identifier, a common target for the image processing algorithms to catch and capture. These are some of the challenges one can see from this. So what we have been trying to do as one of the small study is using denoising filters and like moving average, moving median, or unscented Kalman filter to basically improve or reduce the noise in this data for more accurate estimation of pedestrian counts. And we use some data sets of 200 frames, from this data from 50-minute clips, and 50 frames were sampled from 1-minute clip. And they were all, initially manually annotated, and they were trained using image processing module using faster R CNN neural network, and data augmentation techniques were applied on several of these images. And then we try to assess the mean absolute percentage error between the observed count, pedestrian count, versus the count obtained in this example through one of the denoising filter, the image processing module. And one can see a good correlation between the observed count as well as the estimated count. For this is using the image processing module along with the denoising filter. And this is the varying level of accuracy. The best one we got in this combination of the image processing and moving average filter. So likewise, we have trained our algorithms to this kind of noisy data and improve the accuracy of the pedestrian counts. And there are already some publications out of this work. What we are further doing, which I'm not presenting here, is a complete software for pedestrian sensing and analysis. We have named it as IISc PedSense. In other words, IISc Pedestrian Sensing, or in short IPS, where the software automatically feeds the video data into the software, and with options of manual annotation and identifying the region of origin, or automatically doing it, it then extracts a lot of crowd related parameters, whether it is count, whether it is the trajectory, or whether it is the fundamental flow diagrams of speed, density, and flow, of pedestrians, and similar such other parameters. That's still in the making, and we are already at a prototype stage, and hopefully in future I'll be able to show and demonstrate the capabilities more of those. Coming to the macroscopic studies, as we know, crowd risk prediction is an important aspect because stampedes and situations of stampedes often happen. But understanding what factors influences the crowd risk and having a comprehensive model to incorporate all these factors that are influencing is important to come up with any realistic crowd risk prediction model. What has been observed, in the previous studies is they mostly depend upon crowd density or say flow or speed as the parameter to assess the crowd risk situation, which is not always true. Density is not the only parameter. In many crowd stampede situations, one actually sees that the actual trigger for stampede is some kind of psychological trigger or some weather related, influence and other factors. So what we have tried to do in this work is to incorporate, the factors of psychological triggers as well as weather, besides the crowd dynamics parameter, into coming up with a crowd risk index model for a more comprehensive assessment of the crowd risk. So we call it as crowd dynamic index. We call it as crowd risk index, which consists of 3 components. One of them is crowd dynamic index, where we have incorporated the fundamental speed flow density relationships. We are also studied and incorporated this effect of stop and go waves. We have also studied social group behavior and how it impacts crowd dynamics. And we have talked about and incorporated the impact of the serpentine group behavior, which we have particularly observed in high spiritual and motivational situations. To assess the risk level of these crowd dynamic parameters, we have done expert opinion with 53 experts to rate the risk levels from video clippings based on low, medium, or high, etc. Variables that are used for Ghat and temple situation for this crowd dynamics index are these under each of these categories that I talked about. Not go further details. Then the other sub-index is the crowd anxiety index, where we have used patience and aggression scores as a way to assess the crowd anxiety levels and also the indirect impact of temperature on aggression. Okay, this is another set of study we have done. And so these are the variables used in the crowd anxiety index, and a risk level has been developed using these patient scores and aggression scores. And third is the temperature humidity index, where the effect of temperature, etc., on the crowd risk level has been understood through these kind of empirical relationships taken from the literature, where based on the score of this temperature humidity index, one can classify them as comfort zone or severe stress zone and so on. So using this, three sets of sub-indexes: temperature, humidity index, the crowd dynamics index, and crowd anxiety index, all together with different, steps in each one of them, particularly in crowd dynamics and crowd anxiety. We have used this machine learning methods, random forest classification for clustering and classification and so on. And all these feeds into the comprehensive crowd risk index that we are talking about, which is a summation of all these three sub-indexes, with these weights being identified through our expert opinion, survey. And using this, one can then assess the crowd risk index. So I would say this is the first of its kind crowd risk index ever developed in the literature by anyone across the world. Most of the literature is just focused on the crowd dynamics aspects, mainly the speed, density, etc. And here one would interestingly see the CAI, the crowd anxiety index, actually gets the highest weight, a slightly higher weight as compared to crowd dynamics index, 0.48, which actually cements this whole importance of using psychological parameters in understanding of crowd risk situation, which have never been utilized or used in any crowd risk prediction models. Okay, so this has been an important contribution from this work. And these are the associated publications from this work. I have 3-4 minutes, Dr. Vivek.
Yes, sir. You can take.
I'll come. So these are the publications coming from this microscopic studies part. Quickly going through the microscopic studies, the whole idea is to understand, how the pedestrian flows and the channels of pedestrian flows and increased capacity of facility by, efficient crowd management. Of course, as a complex system, there are multiple individuals, their preferences, habits, activities. There are several interactions if you treat them, each one of them as agents, and their interaction with the environment. There are positive and negative feedbacks. And there are specific situations, like queuing up and waiting behavior of pilgrims due to time restrictions and number of activities, pedestrian behavior motivated by their spiritual mood or religiosity, heterogeneity in crowd, time constraint schedule. So these are all motivations. In terms of the empirical studies on this microscopic behavior, we have looked at walking speed, gap acceptance, personal space, guard behavior, how people maintain their personal spaces, how is the behavior on the riverbank on Ghat, how is the group behavior, and how is the following behavior. These are all some of the empirical studies that we have done. I'll just go through some of them. For example, here, this is a snapshot of result from Ghat, from riverbank. What we've tried understanding is in this graph, we can see speed versus the individual. The speeds are more when people are entering in the section where people are entering into the Ghat region, but away from the Ghat, but near to the Ghat, the speeds are substantially less. So microscopically also, if somebody is trying to simulate the crowd dynamics in the Ghat region, if you don't incorporate these, differences the microscopic differences in their dynamics, or instead of that, just take an average speed flow density relationship, it may actually lead to error or less accurate ability of crowd prediction. Likewise, one will see how the occupancy on the Ghat region in different cells, space cells, is observed in different sections of the Ghat. So locations which are near to the Ghat, the occupancy in space cells have been found to be much higher as compared to locations slightly away or towards the entrance of the Ghat. So these are some of the microscopic observations that we have seen. This was published in this journal of disaster risk reduction. Likewise, we have tried evaluating the personal space and how it is being affected by their average speed, number of immediate neighbors, opposite gender to same gender ratio, and presence of head luggage, and how it impacts their walking speed, etc. Then we have also tried understanding and evaluating gap acceptance behavior, how people identify gaps, when do they accept the gaps, when do they reject the gaps. And here we took some field data from Kumbh Mela, as well as we took some control experiment data from IISc during our IISc Open Day event. So this was the experimental setup of IISc Open Day event, on this gap acceptance study, and from field data was taken from this data set near Bombay Dharamshala. And what we have tried understanding is these characteristics of gap duration, subjective feature, environment, and individual characteristics, how they're affecting their gap choices, whether to accept or reject, and whether it is a mutually accepted gap or a forced gap. So we've used some kind of these logic models and different forms of these logic models to understand this gap acceptance or rejection behavior as a binary choice based on several variables that influences this gap acceptance and choice. And some inferences were made. For example, here young people are willing to wait for a number of gaps to cross over and move as compared to older people. Likewise, several such inferences were made. Gap duration, gender category of age and presence of luggage are most significant variables in gap choice decisions or pedestrians in Kumbh Mela. Likewise, the competitive behavior is much more evident in the natural environment of Kumbh Mela as compared to experimental. So these were some of the microscopic observations. These are a list of publications that we have got from here. I don't think I can take up this part of the work, where we have also tried understanding this behavior, the religious tourism, the satisfaction level, the service quality assessment, and so on. Maybe we can stop here and take some questions if there are. We can always find opportunities in future to present these results in more detail. I'll stop here for now, and would be happy to take any questions if there are.
Thank you, sir. Some questions are there in chat box. I'll just read it out. So
Sure.
it is from Mr. Neeraj Singh. So sir has asked, the stampede at a railway station over bridge in Mumbai, space also affects such events. How can we reduce such events?
Yes. So it's a very important question you asked. I remember this was the Elphinstone Road station on which the stampede had happened. And, again, it's an interesting case where it was not just the crowd density which was responsible for the stampede. Because if you just take crowd density as a parameter to assess a possible crowded situation, one should have stampedes every day in Mumbai railway stations, because those who are familiar with Mumbai would know how much amount of crowd you see every day. But stampedes doesn't happen every day. So what happened that day, if somebody has closely seen and read about this stampede that happened on the railway foot-over bridge, it was raining that day, heavily raining that day. So people were kind of trying to restrain from going out of that foot-over bridge and the stair downstairs, the area which was covered, they were trying to limit themselves within that area covered and not going out. Okay. That was a weather related factor. Okay. Which basically increases the crowd density and reluctance of people to quickly move out of the foot-over bridge area. Second was the actual trigger for stampede was a psychological trigger. There was a street vendor who in a basket was carrying flowers. Okay. And his basket of flowers actually fell down since he was stuck and he couldn't balance it out. So a flower in Hindi is called as fool. Okay. And a bridge in Hindi is called as pull. There's a very slight difference of pronunciation between fool and pull. So he shouted that fool gir gaye. Okay, that means his flowers have fell down, but people heard in panic that pull gir gaya. That means the bridge is fallen. Okay, and that actually created trigger where panic just spread in this whole space, and it led to this stampede, killing almost 35 people. So it again emphasizes the importance of including the weather and psychological related parameters into a more comprehensive crowd risk assessment, I would say. So such kind of model, once calibrated for, say, a railway foot-over bridge or this kind of scenario, can then very well be used and fed into simulation models to assess a possible situation of crowd risk at any place within the premises of, say, railway station. How can we quantify and evaluate crowd anxiety? Yeah. So I didn't go much into detail of that part of the study. We have done a extensive questionnaire survey in collaboration with one of the psychologists from NIAS, where the questionnaire basically tries to judge the psychological traits of the person based on certain questions and their ratings and rankings that we ask, which try to help us measure their aggression and patience level. Using that data and performing what we call, this statistical modeling with factor analysis, structural equation modeling, and so on, we come up with the correlation between the risk level and these psychological factors, which were then converted into what we call it as crowd anxiety index. Okay, there is a paper that I can share later on, which is now under press for publication. It's being accepted, where you can actually read more in detail about how this has been identified. Okay, there is another question. Decisions of crowd would also be affected by type of gathering. Let me read out type of gathering, like fans waiting for celebrity or protest or religious gathering. How can we include these factors in analysis of crowd? Yes. So right now, our work has focused on representative situations of mass religious gatherings. So it is premature for me to say that these crowd dynamics parameter, the way it has been assessed and calibrated or evaluated, and the models for these mass religious gatherings would be directly applicable to, say, a rock star, a rock performance, or a political event, or a sports match, and so on. It may or may not be, okay, but actually potentially there are differences. So one needs more empirical data from other kinds of gatherings to also calibrate or recalibrate these crowd dynamics parameters, and then assess how these models can be applied to those situations. So, so essentially, you need more empirical data and observations for that. Just a second. Hello. Yeah. Sorry, I'm in a meeting. Can you call me after 10 minutes? Please. Thanks. Yeah. I hope that answers this question. Okay. There are no other questions.
I think
there are no other questions.
Sir, thank you, sir, for your nice presentation. And this topic is very much relevant to the present scenario. Because if you take within our country, you can see a lot of religious activities are going on. And that varies with people's behavior and all. So what I feel is this study can be further extended where crowd is there and come up with some policy strategy so that if you want to implement this, people can use, especially police.
Yes, and we are also eventually trying to develop a crowd simulation based early warning system kind of tool, feeding this crowd risk prediction model also into it, where if people can run that in real time or in pre-planning, mode, they can actually evaluate possible situations of crowd risk and have strategies to, reduce or control those crowd situations. Besides, of course, these crowd management guidelines, I didn't have time to go through those crowd management guidelines, but they are also getting published now. They are being accepted for one of the book chapter publication, as part of TRG's book.
Okay.
So one can see that also. But in any case, if somebody goes on my lab website, the IISc lab website, under publications, under report, one can actually download the full PDF version of this KMA report. I think there, anybody who wants to see in detail can find a lot of information.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation.
My pleasure.
Yes, sir. On behalf of the department and Ramaiah Institute, I thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And thanks for the opportunity. And participants, I'm sure they're having a wonderful time, and for the rest of the FDP also.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Okay. To the participants, next presentation is scheduled at 2:30. So you can log in around 2:50. That's all. Thank you.